Welcome back to Dungeon Brew, everyone. Today we're continuing our series on Strongholds, and today we're going to be talking about monks. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Dungeon Brew.
Hey everyone, we're talking about monk strongholds today on Dungeon Brew. We've already covered several classes all the way up through fighters, and we're trying to get into monks today to see what that's going to be, how that's going to be different than some of our other ones. But as we're getting started with that, Joshua, can you start talking about the types of strongholds that you could expect to see for a monk?
Yeah, I like how you started off with. I'm like, what's the word I'm looking for? You start off by try.
Try, yeah.
Try. Monks are an interesting class in D&D, in that they are almost like a mishmash of lots of different classes in terms of like their ideals and what you're pulling together, whether it's a fighter type monk, a stealth type monk, an assassin type monk, a religious type monk. So the type of stronghold that you're looking for and building for them is going to maybe be determined quite a bit by their particular theology, what motivates them, what their path is like as a monk. You may be looking at subclasses before you really start to sit down and build build their stronghold, because it can really include a number of different things. It may be focused more with like this military aspect, depending on what again their theology is. It could be set around a religious perspective. I know whenever I look at monks, it may have that military religious aspect, or it's definitely going to have one of those two. But it also, in my mind, is going to have some growth options that are attached to it. It's going to have things in there like an infirmary. Potentially, it may have a granary. It may have lodgings that are included within it that are going to help reinforce that religious aspect or that military aspect of the stronghold itself. So that's my initial thoughts in thinking about what types you are going to be looking at and that mixed match between the two.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And really, since monks are kind of this borrowed thing that are kind of crammed into D&D, like I agree, they feel off. They were something that were actually introduced fairly early in the D&D system. In fact, I'm pretty sure that they predate things like paladins even. Um, but a monk and his or her role within the world is really determined by the GM/DM. Like, where do they fit? They it may be possible that monks fall into some kind of noble situation. It may be something where being part of the monkhood is not a lifetime dedication, and it's something that you retire from at a certain point. It's almost like a public service type thing. It could be like a schooling type thing where it's like you grow up as a monk and then eventually you graduate to something else or you move on with your life. I'm just trying to think of outside the box when it comes to this class, because it's possible that you could go into other strongholds. You could have a residential stronghold where it's like the monk no longer lives in the monastery. They've retired from that life. They're no longer affiliated with the monastery, without them necessarily being a fallen status that you would typically see when they've betrayed their vows or something like that.
Yeah, and I really kind of fall in that same suit. Like a school was another option that I thought of in regards to the monk, that you have individuals that are going there and they're getting their formative years, kind of getting this type of training. You think of like the subclass, like the Way of Mercy, where maybe they're going there and they're caring for the sick and the elderly that are being brought to the monastery or
Right.
to the stronghold for the monks in some way, and they're caring for them and they're being taught all these different ways of engaging with them. But then again, you may have something that's set up like a drunken master type of
Yeah.
school. So that they got a mercantile system going on, they got a brewery, they're selling their alcohol, they're also training in martial arts, they're militaristic in form in some way. So that I think it's very interesting on how you can develop it, but I love what your point of, you have to first determine how monks are perceived in your world and what their primary function is before you start building a stronghold or having that conversation with your player character on what type of stronghold they want to build. Maybe they want to give back to the poor because of their own particular order. Maybe they want to be a militaristic unit that can be called on by the local region to come and fight in the wars, and they're like those individuals that come in and make the difference in the battle. Maybe they're assassins in nature. Who knows? It just depends on having that conversation and knowing what their place is.
Yeah, well, and like most most PCs, when it comes to their stronghold, the way you acquire it really doesn't change much with a monk. They're either going to eventually graduate into that position within the monastery that they hail from, or they are going to be founding a monastery of their own, or they're going to be taking it from somebody who, an evil or corrupt antagonist of some kind. That generally falls, like, those three things are almost always true for most strongholds. There's some other options that can be available based on class and the situation, but generally those are where you want to land on. So for a monk, figuring out where they're going to acquire the stronghold at a certain point, I think, is important. And then developing that in your storyline is going to be a little bit different. It'll be very similar, I think, to the cleric in a lot of regards. They're going to develop connections within their community, a religious community, presumably of some kind, or at least a foundational community of, we have these similar beliefs, or we have this similar upbringing. If the monk itself is not a religious institution, but something that is more affiliated with, I don't know, a common groundwork of some kind. Like I said, it could be schooling or something else. Like, there could be something else there that's not religious, even if the monastery is generally seen as being religious.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I also want to point out, as we kind of move our conversation from the player character into the NPC stronghold when you're stepping into it for a monk, is that the flavor of the stronghold should feel different when you step into it. It should really feel very much like a home, a place where people spend their lives, a place where people go to die, maybe. But it's a place that is very homey in nature when I think of this particular place for them. When I'm walking into an NPC stronghold, I might see an infirmary, I might see lots of homes built up, I might see training grounds where people have spent their entire lives training on them with, well-beaten pillars of wood or dummies. It's a place that is well used. There are people there frequently, all the time. They've made their lives there. Either they've been completely raised there, being grown up there in like this schoolistic type of stronghold, or they, again, have come there to retire and die and take care of the sick and the ill, and giving their final years back to humanity in some way. But in any case, when you step into it, that flavor of just knowing this is a place of community and a place where people come, no matter, I think, what the perspective of that stronghold is, I think that's very strong to the sense of monkhood, is that sense of community.
Well, and I think in a similar way to cleric strongholds and druid strongholds, many of the religious strongholds, I would say, what you find within their stronghold is more of the same. A monastery is filled with monks, a church is filled with clerics, a grove is filled with druids. Whereas a fighter stronghold, you do have fighters because you have soldiers, but you would also have other people to handle other things, because the fighter probably isn't handling their own finances. They probably have a guy for that. They probably don't do their own healing. They're going to bring in a cleric for that type of thing. Whereas monasteries, typically, you have a monk who is in charge of the martial training. You have a monk who is in charge of the infirmary. You have a monk that is in charge of whatever aspect of it. And generally, monasteries are filled with monks. They're not filled with classes that are outside of that monkhood. And I think that that's part of what you were talking about, is that it's well used because it is filled with more of the same most often. And this kind of varies by class, but I think in general, religious style strongholds, especially those religious dedicated classes like monks, druids, and clerics, all kind of fall into that same bin.
And I think a lot of that probably has to do with reinforcing whatever their dogma is or what their doctrine is.
Yeah.
They're putting people in positions of power that have pledged their lives to fulfill that for a purpose, for a goal, for an objective of some kind, maybe for a god, whatever it is. They've all signed off on making sure that that is the golden nugget that's held up there that they're all working towards or lifting above everything else. And so they're given positions of power because they know that, or they're supposed to keep that particular thing at the forefront of their mind.
So I know, and I know I've talked about this in the Druid video, but I'm going to bring it up again. The Demon Awakened series by R.A. Salvatore. If you want to look at monks and a very interesting way to deal with monks, I would check out that book series. It's very cool. One of the main protagonists in that series is a monk who spends his life in a monastery, and you get a very close look at kind of the structure that, and it's it's Salvatore's perspective on this, but it's a unique one that you don't necessarily see all the time, and I think that it's a fun way of looking at monasteries and potentially getting some inspiration there.
Yeah, Bob knows what's up. So I don't know how much more time you want to spend on maybe the player character and the NPC piece. I think we should talk some about quest giving from a monastery perspective before we talk about antagonists. But I imagine there's going to be more time spent in looking at layer actions for the monk and that antagonist than anything else. So let's go ahead and backtrack just a little bit and talk about what does quest givers look like from a monk stronghold.
So again, we're gonna replicate what's going on with the cleric stronghold in a lot of ways. There is that interconnectivity. There is the sense that's that insular sense that you were talking about, like repeating the dogma, making sure that the monks stay within the monastery and they continue their lives there, because that is good for the longevity of their sect. So if they're bringing in outside help, this is something that a monk can't handle, or it is a monk that, for whatever reason, has left the monastery for their own purposes, and they're returning to the monastery to do work on behalf of the monastery. So we kind of talked about this a little bit in the last video with the way that fighters potentially would be hiring in outside help because there's things that fighters can't handle within their own stronghold. The same thing is true of monks. So the monks, like I said, they're good at most things because they train to be able to handle things themselves. So try and stretch your brain to think about what can't the monk handle. And those situations may extend beyond the monastery itself because they're not permitted to go a certain distance. They're not permitted to engage with the locals in a certain way. So there's a caravan coming. We want you to escort it here because we can't send our monks out in that direction. Or we're restricted from entering into the city and handling conflicts because of local laws. So we need somebody else to go and do that for us because several of our monk brethren were beat up in the streets and we're not allowed to resolve it, and the local magistrate won't do anything about it. Try to get creative with why it is that they need to bring in outside help, because most of the time the monks would probably just do it themselves.
Yeah, I think ideologies really come into play when you're looking at the quests that are coming in. Honestly, the first thing that comes to my mind is like this idea of we can't go and engage in this conflict because it's going to upset our path to salvation, but you can be a tool for our God because you're worthless anyway and you're going to be damned. So we're going to send you to go deal with this conflict, and so that our own longevity in after we die isn't upset or disturbed, but in the matter is still taken care of. Like I see things where it's like our ideology prevents us from behaving or acting in a certain way, and so we have to bring you in to take care of this because our elders have decided it's a necessity, but we can't raise a hand against it. So I think that is the driving force, which I think is what you're talking about, is break down those doctrines, break down those ideologies, find the holes in that way of thinking, and then whatever powers to be within that stronghold have decided that you have to bring in outside help to overcome that obstacle because those within it have taken vows that prevent them from engaging in the type of action that necessitates that the issue be resolved.
Right. And then the other piece of that would be, things that fall outside their purview, which is mostly magic. Magical things are things that monks aren't going to be able to handle themselves. They may know about it. They may be able to give you a great deal of information because they're studied and they're learned and they have the information available, but they just lack the practical talent to deal with an arcane invasion of some kind that is in some way disturbing their way of life. And so they have to bring in outside help to address an issue that is simply beyond their capabilities.
And I do want to make sure that we're not giving the perspective that monks have to be these peace-loving, pacifist types of individuals too, because there's definitely monk strongholds that can be well-equipped in combat and war. And, they may be militaristic in formation, and they can go. I mean, you may have posts that have been beat to the point that there's not much left of them because the monks have trained their bodies and they are able to engage in combat to an extreme to be extremely successful, but maybe there is something that requires some other type of action that they need you to go and take care of because they don't want to raise a hand or because violence isn't the necessary path to fix whatever it is that's going on.
Right. So, monk antagonists, I think, is what we were ready for, yeah?
Yeah, they're the worst.
Yeah.
I don't even know how we conceptualize this. I think what you've said multiple times before is the antagonist does not necessarily need to be someone that's evil, for one.
Right. Yeah, and that, I mean, you definitely have monks that kind of fall into that, like, archetypes that it's like you could definitely see, like, this antagonist shadow monk. It's like that feels pretty evil. But it doesn't necessarily have to be the case all the time. There can be other reasons, especially if you have an evil party that you're targeting a good or a neutral monk for whatever reason. And particularly if you have an evil monk in your party who is interested in turning a good or neutral monastery into an evil monastery of some kind. So there are options there. But going into a monastery in any aggressive sense, you're going to be facing off against monks. You can get really creative with this. I personally, if I were preparing for this, I'd be watching a ton of old kung fu films and stuff like that, where it's like you have to fight. It's like there's going to be sub bosses. It's like you have to fight the master trainer. He's the master of the winds, and then you have to fight the next monk who is the master of the air or whatever. Aaron
Don't
wins.
lie to us, John.
They're the master of the gas. They're all wind related in my monasteries. No, but you can get creative with that. It's like master of the ravens, master of the stone, and have fun with it and give them creative abilities that go beyond just a normal monk class if you're doing something like that.
It's like you're lying to us. You're going to sit back and watch Tibetan documentaries.
Well, not if I want to have a cool kung fu scene. I mean, that's definitely the stuff that I tend to do when I get into this. Is I go to the historical sources, but if it's like I want a really cool monastery where it's like there's this high flavor sense of what it is that you're facing off against, then I might actually sit down and watch some kung fu films.
And it might also be the case that, again, this isn't a violent action to overthrow that antagonist. It may be
Right.
coming in, planting the seed, embedding yourself within the monastery, kind of bringing about doubt about to their beliefs, or putting in like concepts or ideas that start to shift their own ideologies or doctrines away from whatever it is that they believe or the path that they've been on for so long. And so you may kind of be at an ideological war, which makes it more of a social engagement, an exploration engagement. Maybe you have to find their books and the way that things are written. You're looking for interpolations and additions to their books that they use to kind of drive them, and kind of showing, oh, this document has been messed with, or it's been there's scribes have added to this. This isn't the original document, and then you're trying to change again, maybe the elders or the people within there from teaching a particular doctrine and moving them in another direction to overthrow them or change the alignment of that particular stronghold. So there's a lot of fun things you could do with that too, I think, to upset or to overthrow an antagonist or to bend it to your will and get you into a direction that you want to go.
And there's no reason you couldn't take the political route either. I mean, you could just look at the Catholic Church throughout the centuries and the way that not like politics in our modern understanding, but manipulation of the political structure within the Catholic Church to elevate oneself into a position of power. So this could be an ongoing game in and of itself. The campaign itself allows for you to operate within the stronghold to eventually with the goal of becoming the abbot of the monk itself and or of the monastery itself, and gain control of it in some way, manipulating people, blackmailing people, and otherwise gaining control.
Yeah. All right, so let's talk a little bit about lair actions because I think this is the fun thing about monks is diving into what those lair actions look like for the BBEG that you're fighting.
Right.
And I'll be honest, when I think of the best BBEG that I could possibly have within a monk stronghold, I'm gonna go to Bo Raicho from Mortal Kombat. I think I mentioned Mortal Kombat in the last video, and I apologize, but I love the
I think it was
idea.
in this video.
Was it this one? Maybe it been. I just love the idea of your big bad guy vomiting on you or throwing a giant keg at you for like a drunken master thing. Like some real fun stuff that you can include that adds so much flavor to that fight that you're not going to see anywhere else.
Yeah, I really like the idea of that. Yeah, as far as the drunken master, and I mean, I would be watching the Jackie Chan movie definitely if I were doing that. If I wanted to have a drunken master.
Oh yeah, bringing the teacups, bringing the teacups,
as the primary antagonist. And for me, I immediately gravitate towards Shadow Monk because initiative count 20, you're disappearing, reappearing all over the battlefield wherever you want to be. You're adding in obscurement to allow that. You're making sure that shadows exist so that you have as much mobility as possible. You're summoning shadows in order to do combat with you. There's any number of things when it comes to a Shadow Monk that would just make that creepy as hell and a whole lot of fun to actually play through.
And also, talking about movies, watch anything with the Monkey King, whether you're looking at the Jet Li, Jackie Chan version, or some of the other ones that are out there. Watch things like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, which, I mean, you could have essentially air gusts that are in the tavern that spiral up. They get a movement to kind of fly across to the other side of the room, or to jump across, or to, again, have... I want to say that Monkey King has tons of lair action stuff in those final combats anyway that you could probably borrow from to add in here. And I'm losing it. I don't know exactly what it is, but I know that in those final combats, they do things that are like lair actions that occur.
And Monkey King makes me think of... Monkey King makes me think of... I can't remember the name of the movie, but the one with Thomas Gibson from Criminal Minds. He's an American who goes to China and gets teleported into the realm of into whatever realm that is, and he trains with the Monkey King in order to go and save a damsel in distress or something like that. I don't remember exactly, but
it's like a 4-hour-long movie.
I think it was a made-for-TV movie, is what it was. But it shaped my childhood. But you were talking about like gust of wind and stuff like that. I think if you can figure out a way to have a reverse gravity as a lair action for monks, that would be amazing because they have slow fall. So you just it's like, oh, we're going to do reverse gravity. So then you're fighting on the ceiling, but the monks just are able to slow fall, land on their feet, and continue fighting while all the party is prone because they just got slammed into the ceiling. And then you can't use the same lair action 2 rounds in a row, but two lair actions later, it flips again. Everybody gets slammed onto the floor, and the monks are all on their feet, and they're continuing to fight. It would be amazing.
Yeah, I think that the lair action possibilities for what you can do with monks is so interesting because of their additional abilities and things they can do. Now, you can pull out stuff that's like flurry of blows and things like that too, where they get additional hits, or they spring forward and spring back, which may just be more older edition stuff. But adding those types of things into that give that monk some additional abilities and capabilities that are different from what you're going to see from any other class in those BBEGs that you're fighting, I think really makes it engaging and entertaining. And again, when you're looking at the order, specifically the subclass of the monk, you can really change up what that is. One stronghold, I keep wanting to say monastery, but one stronghold for a monk should look extremely different from another one based on the order that they're following.
Right, and there's a lot of variety there too, because the number of monks that exist throughout the world, when it comes to like European traditions or various Asian traditions, like you said, they can all be different. They can be vastly different. Although the idea of a European, monk doing martial arts is pretty hilarious. All right, so I think that's all that I have for Monk Strongholds. Anything else that you want to add, Joshua?
No, I don't. Thank you guys so much again for hanging out with us, talking about Monk Strongholds. Make sure you hit the subscribe button. And I don't even know what we're talking about next week, but
it'll be good.
Do you know? Is it Paladins? It'll be good. It'll be good.
Jon and Josh.